She was dared to kiss the coldest man in the bar. She did. What she didn't know was that the man she touched for 3 reckless seconds was the kind of man cities whisper about and families fear. Maybe you know this feeling. One bad week, one loud bar, one stupid decision you swear means nothing. Then someone looks at you like they can see past the noise, past the smile, past the life you built just to survive. And suddenly nothing feels casual anymore. This story is not just about danger power or obsession. It is about what happens when an ordinary woman collides with a world built on control, loyalty, and secrets too dark to name. Stay with me until the end because this one unfolds like a wound and a promise at the same time. An hour earlier, before that kiss turned a crowded room into a held breath, the night had felt harmless. The gilded room sat in the heart of River North like it knew exactly what people came there to forget. Warm amber light spilled across polished wood and worn leather. Ice knocked against glass. A jazz cover drifted from the small stage near the back, soft enough to be ignored, smooth enough to make strangers lean a little closer when they talked. Outside, Chicago was cold and sharp, all wind off the river and red brake lights in wet streets. Inside, everything felt golden, forgiving, almost careless. Savannah Blake let that warmth sink into her skin the second she slid into the booth. She needed it. The week had been ugly in the small, exhausting way adult life could be ugly. Not tragic, not dramatic enough to earn sympathy. Just relentless. At Ash and Rowan events, she had spent 5 days talking anxious clients off ledges they built themselves. A bride had cried over Candle Heights. A corporate sponsor had changed an entire launch schedule 12 hours before venue lock. Her boss had called her indispensable in the same breath she handed her 2 extra accounts. By Friday evening, Savannah had smiled so much her face hurt. Tonight she wanted noise. She wanted laughter that came from the stomach instead of the throat. She wanted one night where nothing needed fixing. Brooke raised her martini first, to surviving another month in a city determined to wear us down. Savannah laughed and lifted her own drink. That sounded like the opening line of a lawsuit. It sounded honest, Macy said. They clinked glasses. Brooke looked exactly the way she always did after 2 sips of gin. Sharp eyes, smudged lipstick, blonde hair she never touched because somehow it stayed perfect on its own. Macy, dark-haired and bright-eyed, leaned back against the booth like life was a private joke she had already figured out. They had been Savannah's people since college, the kind of friends who knew when she was lying before she even finished the sentence. Savannah took a long sip of tequila and lime and let herself relax. The booth sat near the center of the room, close enough to the bar to catch the movement, and far enough from the speakers to let them talk without shouting. Men passed in fitted jackets and expensive watches. Women laughed into cocktails the color of fruit and bad ideas. Somewhere near the pool table, somebody cheered too hard over something that clearly did not matter. The whole room felt like a temporary suspension of consequence. Brooke leaned forward and narrowed her eyes at Savannah with the kind of expression that always meant trouble. No, Savannah said immediately. Brooke blinked. I haven't said anything yet. You have trouble in your face. Macy laughed. That is true. Brooke ignored both of them, truth or dare. Savannah groaned and tipped her head back against the booth. We are not 17. That is not an answer, Brooke said. It is if you respect me. Macy took a sip of her drink and smiled over the rim of the glass. She never picks truth. That is because truth is invasive, Savannah said. And dare is self-destructive, Brooke replied. Savannah pointed at her. Exactly. Which makes it more fun. Brooke's grin widened. So you do pick dare? Savannah stared at both of them, already regretting every life choice that had led to this booth. Then she sighed. Fine. Dare. Macy sat up straighter. I love this part. Brooke took her time looking around the room. She scanned the dance floor, the bar, the booths along the wall, then stopped. A slow smile spread across her face. Savannah followed her line of sight. At the far end of this bar stood a man who did not belong to the same atmosphere as everyone else. He was alone, which in a place like this meant something. Not lonely, not abandoned, alone by choice. Tall enough that people shifted around him without seeming to notice they were doing it. Broad shoulders under a black jacket, dark hair neatly cut, one hand resting near a glass he did not seem interested in drinking. He was not checking his phone. He was not watching the televisions over the bar. He was not flirting with the women who had already looked twice. He just stood there still in a room built on motion. There were handsome men everywhere in Chicago. Savannah saw them at venues, in restaurants, in elevator mirrors, at charity events where everyone pretended to care deeply about causes they had heard of 10 minutes earlier. This man was something else. There was no effort in him, no performance, no hunger for attention. The kind of restraint that felt more dangerous than arrogance ever could. Brooke leaned in and said very softly, "I dare you to kiss the coldest man in this bar." Savannah let out a short laugh because that felt safer than admitting the tiny shiver that had just passed through her. "Absolutely not." Macy followed her gaze and exhaled. "Oh, that is evil." "He looks like he would have me removed from the building," Savannah said. "Exactly," Brooke answered. Macy turned to her with delight. "It is perfect." Savannah kept looking at him. He had not moved much at all, but every few seconds she noticed some new detail. The watch at his wrist, the clean line of his jaw, the way his shirt fit across his chest like it had been made for him and him alone. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just expensive enough to suggest his life did not involve asking prices. A woman at the bar next to him laughed at something her friend said and brushed his arm as she turned. He stepped away before the contact fully landed. Not rude, not interested. Savannah looked back at her friends. "This is a terrible idea." Brooke lifted her glass. Most memorable ones are. Savannah took another sip of her drink and tried to summon the right kind of recklessness. The room felt warmer now. Her cheeks had that familiar, dangerous flush that came right before confidence turned into bad judgment. She could still say no. She could laugh it off. She could choose peace. Then Macy said, "You will think about this all night if you don't do it." Savannah narrowed her eyes. "I hate that you know me." Macy smiled. "Go." Savannah emptied her glass in one long swallow and slid out of the booth before her own common sense could catch up. The walk across the room felt longer than it should have. Her heels clicked softly against the floorboards. The air near the bar was cooler. Closer now, she could see the man's face more clearly. Sharp cheekbones. A mouth that looked like it did not waste words. Eyes she had not expected to be gray cold and clear and impossible to read. He turned before she reached him, not fully, just enough to tell her he had noticed her coming long before she arrived. For a fraction of a second, Savannah considered aborting the entire mission. Then Brooke's voice echoed in her head. "Do it." Savannah stepped in. "Hi," she said. His gaze moved over her face once, not lazily, not rudely. Precise. Assessing. "Hello." His voice was low, even with no trace of drunken softness or barroom looseness. That made this worse. Savannah smiled because smiling had carried her through every awkward moment of her adult life. "I know this is strange." "Yes," he said. She should have laughed. She should have made a joke. She should have said never mind and walked away. Instead, before fear could harden into retreat, she lifted onto the balls of her feet and kissed him. His mouth was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. The second was how still he went. Not startled, not reactive, just utterly still as if the world had paused and he was deciding whether to let it move again. The kiss was brief light, barely more than contact. 3 seconds, maybe less. Then Savannah pulled back with a grin already rising to save her. That grin faded almost immediately. He was looking at her the way people looked at something unexpected in the middle of a road at night. Not because it frightened them, because it should not have been there and now it was. "You okay?" she asked quickly. His gaze settled on her face. That was a dare. She nodded suddenly, conscious of her own breathing. "Yeah, just a stupid game." He placed one hand on the bar beside her. Large hand, strong wrist, no ring. He still did not touch her. You shouldn't let people push you into things. The line should have embarrassed her. Instead, something stubborn rose in her chest. "I wanted to." For the first time, something changed in his expression. It was subtle, not softness, not approval. Interest. He studied her for 1 beat longer, then stepped back and gave her room. "Be careful," he said. Savannah did the only thing she could still manage. She turned and walked back to the booth before the heat in her face became obvious. Brooke grabbed her wrist the second she slid into the seat. "You did it." Macy covered her mouth with both hands. "You actually did it." Savannah laughed because her body needed somewhere to put the adrenaline. "I did." Brooke leaned across the table. What did he say? Savannah reached for the water glass and took a sip she did not need. that I should not let people push me into things. Macy groaned. That is somehow hotter than flirting. Brooke watched Savannah more carefully. Why are you blushing? I am not blushing. You are absolutely blushing. Savannah waved them off, but the truth was she felt strange now. Awake in a way that had nothing to do with tequila. Every nerve seemed to have sharpened. It was not the kiss itself that stayed with her. It was the look afterward, the absolute stillness, the sense that she had stepped close to something she did not understand and had been let go on purpose. She tried to shake it off. The band picked up. Brooke dragged them toward the dance floor. Macy nearly lost one heel and laughed so hard she had to cling to Savannah's arm. For a while, the night returned to normal rhythm. Bodies moved. Music pulsed. Sweat and perfume and spilled alcohol blurred everything into the same harmless haze most city nights ended in. But every so often Savannah felt it, that awareness. Once while turning toward the bar for water, she found him exactly where she had left him, standing in nearly the same place, drink untouched eyes on her. He did not look away when she caught him. Something in her chest tightened. She looked first. Later, when Brooke and Macy were arguing over whether to order fries at 11:30, as if that decision had legal consequences, Savannah slipped away from the table and headed toward the hallway near the restrooms. The music softened there. The air was cooler. She pressed one hand against the wall for a second and closed her eyes. It had been one stupid dare, nothing more. She needed to stop acting like she had wandered into a scene from a movie. You okay? She turned too fast. He was there. Close enough now that she could smell clean soap cedar, and something darker underneath that seemed to belong to him more than to any bottle. Up close, his height felt almost disorienting. Savannah had to tilt her chin up a little to hold his gaze. Yes, she said. Yeah. His eyes flicked toward the main room. Your friends look like trouble. A laugh slipped out of her before she could stop it. That is because they are. Something almost like amusement touched the corner of his mouth, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Roman, he said, offering his hand. Savannah looked at it for half a heartbeat before taking it. His grip was firm, warm, controlled. The kind of handshake that made her instantly aware of her own pulse. Savannah. He repeated her name once quietly. Savannah. It should not have mattered. It did. I did not take offense, he said. I figured, she replied. You seemed calm. Roman's gaze rested on her for a moment that felt a little too long to be casual. Did I? She folded her arms loosely, trying to recover ground she was not sure she had lost. You did not look like a man deeply wounded by a bar dare. That almost smile appeared again. Faint. Brief. Dangerous because it transformed his whole face without softening it. You did not ask for my number, he said. Savannah raised a brow. You did not offer it. His eyes held hers. Fair. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Brooke. Where are you? We are leaving. Savannah exhaled. I have to go. Roman stepped back at once. No hesitation, no pressure, just space. Of course. She took 2 steps, then stopped and turned back because leaving without saying anything felt oddly worse. Sorry, she said, for kissing you. Roman looked at her with that same impossible stillness. It was not a mistake, he said. The words followed her out into the cold. Chicago after midnight always looked cleaner than it was. Streetlights on wet pavement, steam lifting from grates, taxis passing in streaks of yellow and white. Brooke and Macy talked the entire ride home, replaying the dare as if it were already legend. Savannah laughed when she was supposed to laugh, added details when they demanded them, but inside her mind kept returning to Roman's face in that quiet hallway. It was not a mistake. At home, her apartment in Lakeview felt smaller than usual. Familiar in a way that should have been comforting. She kicked off her heels, washed her face, drank half a glass of water in the dark kitchen, and stood for a long moment with one hand on the counter. Then she went to bed and dreamed in fragments. Gray eyes, a hand on the bar beside her. That voice saying her name like it mattered. Morning arrived with a headache and regret. Savannah woke flat on her back, one arm thrown over her eyes, sunlight cutting through the blinds like punishment. Her mouth tasted like lime and bad choices. Every beat of her pulse landed right behind her temples. She lay there for a minute and tried to reconstruct the night in order. Drinks, music, Brooke laughing too loudly, Macy calling her brave when she clearly meant unstable, and him. The memory returned intact and unhelpful. She groaned into her pillow. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Then again. Savannah reached for it with the reluctance of someone opening a legal notice and saw 3 messages from Brooke waiting in a row. "Open the video. You were iconic. I have evidence." Savannah shut one eye against the brightness and tapped the file. The video was shaky and full of bar noise. She watched herself cross the room with a confidence she did not remember feeling. Watched herself stop in front of Roman. Watched herself lean up and kiss him. Then she saw his face after. She paused the video. Even through grain and bad lighting, the expression was unmistakable. Not anger, not confusion. Something much more unsettling. It looked like recognition arriving where it had no right to. Savannah stared at the frozen frame longer than she meant to. Then she tossed the phone aside, sat up, and muttered to the empty room. It was a dare. Saying it out loud did nothing. By the time she reached the office, she had showered, put on a navy blouse and cream slacks, tied her hair back, and arranged her face into something that suggested professional stability. Ash and Rowan Events occupied the 3rd floor of a converted brick building in West Loop. All glass partitions, polished concrete, expensive candles, and women moving quickly while pretending they were not in crisis. Savannah made it all of 6 steps past reception before Brooke appeared at her desk like bad karma. "There she is," Brooke said, "the woman who assaulted a statue." Savannah dropped her tote bag into her chair. "Please do not start." Macy popped up from the other side of the divider with her phone already in hand. "Too late." Savannah narrowed her eyes. "Why do you both look pleased with yourselves?" Macy held up her screen. "Because I found him." That got her. Savannah's stomach dipped before she could stop it. "Found who?" Brooke looked offended. "Do not insult us." Macy turned the screen toward her. The image was not high quality, but it was clear enough. Roman stood outside a downtown office building in a charcoal suit, one hand in his coat pocket, expression as unreadable as ever. 2 men in dark suits stood several feet away, one scanning the street, the other watching the building entrance. Savannah frowned. "That looks like security." "That looks like money," Brooke corrected. Macy zoomed out and scrolled. Roman DeLuca, board donor list, private investment group, real estate development, logistics, hospitality holdings. Savannah looked up. "That all sounds very legitimate." Macy gave her a look. "That all sounds carefully legitimate." Brooke leaned closer. Also, his picture at the charity gala had 2 men behind him who looked like they know where to hide bodies. Savannah let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You 2 need help," maybe Brooke said. "But we are also correct." Savannah turned back to her computer because that felt like the responsible thing to do. There were vendor emails waiting. A venue walkthrough at 2. Linen samples she needed to approve before lunch. The normal machinery of her life was right there asking for sensible attention. It lasted 28 minutes. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. Savannah stared at the screen. Brooke, who should have been working but had clearly chosen voyeurism instead, leaned across the divider. "Who is it?" Savannah turned the phone slightly so they could see. The message preview showed only her name, Savannah Blake. Her pulse jumped high into her throat. Macy made a sound so sharp it barely qualified as human speech. "Open it." Savannah picked up the phone. Her thumb hovered. Then she typed. "Who is this?" The reply came after a pause that felt deliberate. "Roman." Brooke slapped a hand over her mouth. Macy gripped the divider with both hands and whispered, "No." Savannah stared down at the single word like it might rearrange itself into something safer. "How did you get my number?" This time the pause lasted longer. "I asked. If that was inappropriate, tell me now and I will not contact you again." Savannah read it twice. The message should have felt invasive. It did a little. But the immediate offer to disappear if she wanted him gone changed the shape of it. No swagger, no assumption, no entitlement. Just control, yes, but disciplined control. Brooke leaned closer. What did he say? Savannah handed her the phone without answering. Brooke read it and looked up slowly. "That is annoyingly respectful." Macy nodded. "That is how powerful men get away with being terrifying." Savannah took the phone back. "Why are you texting me?" Roman answered almost immediately this time. "Because I did not like the idea of never seeing you again." Silence spread across the 3 desks. Brooke sat down in Savannah's guest chair as if her legs had given out. Macy pressed both palms to her cheeks in theatrical distress. Savannah did neither. She just kept staring at the screen while something warm and dangerous opened low in her chest. She should have said no right then. She should have blocked the number and returned to linen samples and contracts and the quiet dignity of a life that did not include men like Roman DeLuca. Instead, she typed the most honest question she had. "What do you want?" The answer came back after a few seconds. "One dinner. If you are not interested after that, I will leave it there." Brooke closed her eyes. That man knows exactly what he is doing. Macy leaned on Savannah's desk. "You are saying yes." Savannah did not look up. "I have not said that." "You are absolutely saying yes," Brooke said. Savannah typed before she could think too long. "Where?" Roman's reply arrived almost at once. "Tomorrow, 7, somewhere quiet." Savannah let her eyes close for 1 second. Then she opened them and typed, "I will meet you. No driver, no car sent for me." Brooke's jaw dropped. "You negotiated." Macy looked genuinely moved. "I am so proud," Roman replied. "Understood. I will send the address tomorrow." "Thank you, Savannah." That final line stayed with her all day. Not because it was charming, because it sounded sincere, and that somehow felt more dangerous than charm ever could. The rest of the workday moved around her while her mind stayed slightly elsewhere. She answered emails, walked a rooftop venue with a client who could not decide between ivory and winter white, took notes during a budget call and immediately forgot half of it. By 5:30, Brooke had already come by her desk twice to ask what she was wearing to dinner. Macy had offered 3 separate warnings disguised as jokes. By the time Savannah got home, the city outside her window had turned blue and silver with evening. She stood in front of her closet longer than she wanted to admit. Not because she wanted to impress him, because she did not want to look like the woman who had turned a drunken dare into a life choice. She finally chose a black dress, simple enough to feel like herself. Boots she could walk in, and a camel coat that made the whole thing look intentional. Brooke and Macy came over under the false pretense of helping and immediately behaved like stylists on a reality show. "You look nervous," Brooke said. "I am not nervous." "You are holding the same lipstick like it insulted your family," Macy replied. Savannah set it down. "Fine, I am aware." Brooke adjusted the collar of her coat with unnecessary seriousness. "If he gives you a bad feeling, you leave." Macy held up one finger. "If he acts like brooding is a personality trait, you leave." Brooke lifted a finger, too. "If he tries to buy your attention, stay unimpressed." Macy added, "If he is actually kind, do not punish him for having a terrifying face." Savannah laughed despite herself. "That is not advice. That is a psychological puzzle." "It is excellent advice," Brooke said. Savannah slipped her phone into her bag. At that exact moment it buzzed. Roman had sent the address. She looked down. A restaurant in the West Loop she had heard of, but never visited. Hard to get into. Quiet. Elegant. The kind of place people either celebrated something in or confessed something in. Savannah read the message once, then again. On her screen beneath the address sat one final line. "I will be there." Savannah locked the phone and lifted her gaze. "All right," she said softly. Then she reached for her coat and headed for the door, carrying the strange, steady feeling that this night had already begun before she ever left home. By the time Savannah stepped out into the evening, Chicago had turned the color of steel. The wind came hard between buildings, carrying the scent of wet pavement traffic and the river somewhere beyond the grid of downtown streets. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and checked the address on her phone once more, even though she had already memorized it. The car ride to the restaurant felt shorter than it should have. Too much of her attention stayed fixed on one fact. He would already be there. That certainty did something to her nerves, not because it sounded romantic, because it sounded like Roman. The restaurant sat behind a dark wood door on a quieter block in the West Loop, all low lighting and tall windows that reflected the street rather than revealing much of what was inside. It looked expensive without begging to be admired. A place people found because they belonged there, not because it advertised itself to strangers. Savannah stepped inside and immediately felt the temperature change. Warmth, candlelight. The soft murmur of expensive conversation. The air carried butter wine cedar and something floral she could not name. A pianist near the back played something slow and elegant that never quite forced itself into the room. The host looked up from the stand. "Good evening," Savannah gave her name. The host's expression shifted just enough to notice. Not shock. Recognition. A small, practiced adjustment of tone. "Of course. Right this way, Miss Blake." Her stomach tightened at that. He had arranged this carefully. She followed the host through the room, aware of every step. Tables glowed beneath shaded lamps. Glassware caught gold light. People spoke in low voices, leaning toward one another, as if the room had been built for confidences rather than meals. At the back, near a wall lined with dark shelves and art that looked curated rather than purchased, Roman stood as she approached. In the bar he had seemed imposing. Here he looked inevitable. His suit was charcoal perfectly cut with no visible effort spent on it and no need for any. Dark tie, white shirt watch at his wrist, posture so composed it made everyone else around him seem slightly less finished. He stood when she reached the table, and the simple courtesy somehow made him feel even more dangerous. "You came," he said. His voice was quiet, but in the hush of that room it seemed to reach her more directly than anything loud ever could. Savannah slipped off her coat and handed it to the host. "You sound surprised." Roman's gaze rested on her for one beat too long to be casual. "I do not like assuming I will get what I want." She met his eyes and felt the weight of that line settle between them. "That is a very intense thing to say before appetizers." Something faint moved at the corner of his mouth. He pulled out her chair and waited until she sat before taking his own. "I was aiming for honest." The table was set simply, which she appreciated. No showmanship. Crisp white linen, candlelight, water glasses already filled, a narrow vase with a single stem of winter greenery. The kind of restraint that signaled confidence rather than austerity. For a moment neither of them spoke. Savannah became aware of herself in small ways. The heat in her cheeks from walking in out of the cold, the pulse in her throat, the fact that Roman had not stopped looking at her long enough for her to fully settle. "You look disappointed," she said. Roman tilted his head slightly. "Do I? You expected me to be late." "Number." "Then what did you expect?" His eyes moved over her face with unnerving calm. "I expected you to change your mind at least once before arriving." Savannah exhaled a short laugh. "I did. And yet here I am." Roman's gaze softened by a degree so small she nearly missed it. "Yes." The waiter appeared and the timing felt almost merciful. Menus were offered. Water poured again, even though neither glass needed it. Savannah ordered sparkling water. Roman ordered still. No wine, no cocktail, no performance of indulgence. When the waiter left, Savannah glanced at him. "You do not drink." "I drink, but not now. Not when I prefer to remain fully aware." She let one brow lift. "Of me." His answer came without hesitation. "Of everything." That should have sounded evasive. It did not. It sounded like a habit so ingrained he no longer noticed it in himself. Savannah opened her menu and tried to remember how to behave like a woman at dinner instead of a witness being interviewed by a man who could probably detect lies by breathing pattern alone. She picked a pasta she barely registered. Roman did the same with his own meal. He seemed like a man who could order excellent food without ever needing to study the page. Once the menus disappeared, the silence returned. It was not awkward. That almost made it worse. Roman folded his hands loosely on the table. "How was your day?" Savannah smiled despite herself. "That is a very normal question for a man who acquired my number through methods you described as asking. I can ask normal questions." That was not an answer. His eyes stayed on hers, I know. She looked down for a moment, fighting back a smile. "My day was fine. One client changed her floral palette 3 times. Another sent an email marked urgent because she could not decide between cream napkins and ivory napkins. There was a small crisis involving delivery timing and a larger crisis involving someone named Kendall, who believes all chair covers are an attack on elegance." Roman listened as if every word mattered. When she finished, he said, "And you fixed all of it. That is literally my job." "You are good at it." Savannah blinked. "You have not seen me work." "I have seen the way you speak about it." Something warm moved unexpectedly through her chest. She covered it with a sip of water. "And you," she said, "what did you do today?" Roman glanced at the candle, then back at her. "Meetings." She laughed softly. "That is not an answer either." "Number." "You are very comfortable withholding information. I am very comfortable choosing when to give it." Savannah leaned back. "Do you always talk like every sentence belongs in a courtroom transcript?" His mouth shifted again, nearly a smile. "Only when I am trying to be careful." "With me?" "Yes." The honesty of it landed harder than charm would have. The waiter returned with bread and olive oil. Savannah tore off a piece more for something to do than from hunger. Roman thanked the waiter quietly, then waited until they were alone again. "Tell me something true," he said. She glanced up. "That sounds dangerous." "It does not have to be." Savannah thought for a second. I almost said no to this dinner. Why? Because I do not usually go out with men who feel like trouble. Roman regarded her steadily. And I do. A laugh escaped her. You really do not waste time pretending to be harmless. Number. That word hung between them. Savannah put the bread down. What about you? Roman's gaze did not move. What about me? Tell me something true. He was quiet for a moment, and she had the strange feeling he was considering not whether to answer, but how honest to be. Then he said, I did not forget you. The restaurant did not change at all. The pianist kept playing. Someone at another table laughed quietly. A server passed carrying a silver tray, but the temperature at their table seemed to shift all the same. Savannah swallowed. It was a dare. I know. You barely know me. Yes. Then why? Roman looked at her the way he had looked at her at the bar, only this time there was less surprise in it and more certainty. Because you walked up to a stranger you should have avoided, and kissed him like you had decided fear did not apply to you. Savannah's mouth parted slightly. Roman continued, voice even. Then you apologized because you are not reckless in the way people assume. You are reckless in the way tired people become when they want one honest moment. Her throat tightened. He should not have been able to see that. She reached for humor because she did not know what else to do with the fact that he had. You make me sound like an article in a psychology journal. I make you sound interesting. The waiter arrived with their first course, and Savannah wanted to be annoyed at the interruption. Instead, she used it to breathe. Once the plates were set down, Roman let the conversation drift to safer territory, almost as if he understood he had come too close to something unguarded and chose not to press. He asked where she had grown up. Naperville. He inclined his head slightly. Suburbs. Yes, thank you, I know what they are. His eyes warmed. You stayed in Chicago. I always knew I would. Why? Savannah twirled pasta around her fork and thought about it. Because it felt like a city where you could keep becoming someone else if you wanted to. Roman watched her quietly, and did you? She looked down at her plate. Some days. He let that answer stand. She asked about his family and got predictably little in return. They are in the city, he said. That tells me nothing. It tells you where they live. That is not what I asked. Number. Do you enjoy frustrating people? His expression remained calm. Only specific people. This time she laughed fully, and the sound loosened something at the table. The conversation moved more naturally after that. Roman asked better questions than most people did. Not where do you vacation, but where do you go in the city when you do not want to be seen? Not what music do you like, but what song do you never skip even when you are pretending not to care? Not are you close with your friends, but which one would show up at 2 a.m. with no questions asked? Savannah answered before she realized she was doing it honestly. Brooke would bring judgment and a bottle of wine. And Macy. Macy would bring a plan, a flashlight, and possibly bolt cutters. Roman's mouth curved. Useful. She is terrifying in a very civic-minded way. For a moment, they ate in quiet, but it had become a shared quiet now, rather than an empty one. Savannah caught herself watching his hands as he cut into his meal. Strong hands. Precise movements. No wasted gesture. A man who looked built for control and practiced it so constantly it had become muscle memory. It was then that she noticed the men near the entrance. They were not obvious if you were not paying attention. Dark suits. Earpieces barely visible. Not dining. Not checking phones. One positioned where he could see the room, the other near the bar, watching without seeming to. Savannah lowered her fork slowly. Roman followed her gaze without turning his head. Yes. She looked back at him. Yes, what? They are with me. Her pulse flickered higher. That is not normal. Number. Why are they here? Roman lifted his water glass, took one measured sip, and set it back down. Because I prefer not to leave certain things to chance. Savannah leaned back in her chair. Certain things like what? This restaurant running out of sea salt. His expression did not change, this evening remaining calm. That cooled her more than the sparkling water had. She set her fork down fully. You have security at dinner. Yes. Because someone might do what? Roman's gaze held hers. Cause a problem. The answer was too vague to be useful. Too calm to be reassuring. A thread of caution tightened inside her. Not fear exactly. Not yet. But something neighboring it. Roman? Yes. She heard the shift in her own voice and did not try to soften it. What kind of life do you actually live? He did not reach for his glass. Did not look away. Did not pretend not to understand the question. The kind that requires preparation. That is still vague, I know. Savannah stared at him, suddenly tired of elegant deflection. Do you do this on purpose? Yes. The directness of the answer hit her harder than the evasions had. Why? Because too much honesty at the wrong time can feel like pressure. And this does not. His eyes moved over her face, quiet and intent. No. This feels like you deciding whether to trust your instincts. She held his gaze. And what are my instincts telling me? Roman's voice lowered slightly. That you should ask the question you actually want answered. Savannah felt her pulse in her wrists. The pianist played on. A server passed, carrying 2 glasses of red wine to another table. Somewhere near the back, a woman laughed softly, unaware that at one table in the room the air had sharpened into something almost metallic. Savannah asked, "Are you dangerous?" Roman did not smile. He did not look offended. He did not answer immediately either. Then he said, "I can be." There it was, simple, quiet, unembellished. Savannah's breath caught before she could stop it. "That is supposed to comfort me." Number. Then why say it like that? Because lying to you now would make the rest irrelevant. The candlelight flickered between them. Savannah searched his face for menace and found none. That was somehow more unnerving than if he had tried to intimidate her. He was not flaunting danger. He was acknowledging it the way one might acknowledge weather moving in from the lake. She folded her hands in her lap to keep them still. "And yet you asked me here." "Yes. Why?" Roman's jaw tightened very slightly, the only visible sign that this mattered more to him than he wanted it to. "Because I wanted to see you again, and because I believed you should have enough truth to choose whether that was a mistake." Savannah let out a slow breath. No one had ever spoken to her quite like this. Not because it was romantic, because it assumed she was capable of handling an answer that might send her away. That more than his security or his composure or the expensive restaurant made him difficult to dismiss. Dinner continued, though changed now. The ease remained, but there was a current under it. Savannah found herself looking at the room differently. The exits, the staff, the way people occasionally glanced toward Roman and then away, not curious enough to stare, aware enough to notice him. When the plates were cleared, she declined dessert. Roman did the same without argument. He settled the check with a signature "no wallet" visible, as though the mechanics of money were not things he had to demonstrate. Outside, the cold met them at once. The city had grown quieter in that late-hour way Chicago sometimes did. Traffic thinned to a smoother hum. Streetlights washed the sidewalks in pale gold. Their breath ghosted in the air as they stepped beneath the awning. Savannah turned to face him. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Roman said, "Now I ask properly." She waited. "May I kiss you?" The formality of it went through her like heat. She looked at him, at the severe mouth and watchful eyes, the coat collar dark against the night. The weight of everything she did not know and everything he had chosen not to lie about. "This time was not a dare," she said quietly. "Number. This time is a choice." Yes, the city moved around them. Tires on wet pavement. A siren far off. Someone laughing half a block away. But in that small square of light beneath the awning, the world seemed to narrow to one held breath. Savannah nodded once. Roman stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. One hand lifted toward her face and stopped just before touching waiting. She could have turned away. He made certain of it. She did not. His palm settled against her cheek, warm, broad, controlled. Then he kissed her. The first kiss had been quick, reckless, almost laughable in how fast it had happened. This was nothing like that. Roman kissed like a man who had spent an unnatural amount of effort holding himself back and had now decided with great care to stop. Slow pressure. No rush, no greed. Just enough depth to make her knees soften and her breath catch in the center of her chest. She felt the restraint in him more than anything. The precision. The way he held the moment rather than taking it. When he pulled back, he stayed close enough that the cold air could not fully get between them. "You are shaking," he murmured. Savannah opened her eyes. "So are you." For the first time, something unguarded crossed his face, not weakness, exposure. Then headlights washed across the curb. A black SUV rolled to a stop across the street. The passenger window lowered halfway. A man in a dark suit leaned slightly toward the opening. "Mr. DeLuca, we need a word." Roman changed without moving much at all. Savannah felt it instantly. His hand dropped from her face. His shoulders squared almost invisibly. The softness that had appeared only moments ago closed like a door. Not entirely, but enough. He shifted one step so that his body stood slightly between hers and the street. "This," he said quietly, eyes still on her, "is what I was trying to warn you about." Savannah's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "Warn me about what?" "My life touching yours." The man in the SUV waited with the patient stillness of someone used to being obeyed. The engine idled low. The street suddenly felt colder. Savannah looked from the car back to Roman. "Are they with you?" "Yes." "That does not make me feel better. It is not meant to." The man in the car spoke again. "Sir." Roman did not look away from Savannah. "1 minute." The window stayed down. Savannah felt her heartbeat climb. "You should go." "I will. Then go." Roman studied her face, and something in his own expression shifted again. Not colder. More careful. "You can leave now," he said. "No explanation. No apology. You owe me neither." Savannah stared at him. "You are giving me an exit." "Yes." "Why?" "Because if you stay, it must be your choice." The honesty of that nearly undid her. She glanced toward the SUV. The man inside looked forward now, professionally uninterested, but his presence altered the entire street. This was no longer dinner, no longer chemistry under candlelight. This was the edge of something else, and Roman knew exactly where that edge lay. Savannah looked back at him. "Are you in trouble?" Roman's eyes narrowed a fraction. "No." "You hesitated." "I chose my answer." "That is not the same thing." For 1 second she thought he might retreat behind those careful walls again. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "I do not want you afraid of me," he said. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "I am not afraid of you." Roman went very still. "You should be cautious," he replied. "Cautious is not the same as afraid." Something passed between them, then something quieter and more intimate than the kiss had been. Recognition, perhaps. Or the exact shape of the risk neither of them could deny anymore. Savannah asked, "Will you tell me the truth?" Roman looked toward the SUV once, then back to her. "If you ask the right questions." "That is infuriating." His mouth moved faintly. "I know." The passenger window rolled up halfway, then stopped as if patience had a limit even here. Roman reached into his coat and drew out a plain card. No company logo, no title. Just his name and a number pressed into thick white stock. He held it out. Savannah took it. "If you want the conversation that should have happened before this dinner," he said, "come to my house tomorrow evening. I will answer what matters." Her pulse skipped. "Your house?" "Yes." "That is either very honest or a terrible idea. Possibly both." The cold caught in her lungs when she breathed in. He stepped back, then giving her room with the same care he had shown from the start. "I will not ask again tonight." Savannah looked at the card in her hand, then up at him. "And if I say no?" Roman's expression did not harden. "Then I leave you alone." She believed him. That belief was part of the problem. Roman glanced once more toward the SUV. "I need to speak with them." Savannah nodded before she could decide whether that was wisdom or surrender. He held her gaze one final moment. "Go home, Savannah." She should have asked one more question. She should have demanded a clearer answer, a safer answer. Any answer that belonged more naturally in her life than the ones he had given her. Instead, she heard herself say, "Good night, Roman." His eyes softened very slightly. "Good night." She turned and started down the sidewalk. At the corner, she looked back once. Roman stood in the wash of streetlight near the curb, coat dark against the pale concrete. The black SUV waiting for him like it belonged to a world she had only just begun to glimpse. He did not wave. He just watched her until she turned away again. By the time Savannah reached her building, the city felt altered in ways she could not yet name. Her apartment was warm, familiar, quiet. She locked the door, set her bag on the kitchen counter, and took the card out again. Roman DeLuca. No title, no explanation, just the name and the number. She placed it on the table, stared at it for a long moment, then carried it with her to the bedroom anyway, as if leaving it behind in the kitchen might somehow return the night to something ordinary. Savannah did not sleep well. The card stayed on her nightstand where she could see it every time she turned her head. Roman DeLuca. One name, one number. No company logo. No title. No explanation that might have made him smaller, safer, or easier to file away into a category that belonged in her life. By morning, the city outside her window looked washed in pale gray, the kind of winter light that made everything seem unfinished. She stood in her kitchen with a mug of coffee growing cold between her hands and looked at the card again. Her instincts pulled in opposite directions. One part of her said no. Stay out of this. Walk away while you still could. He had already admitted enough danger to make caution feel reasonable. Most people would take the warning and thank themselves later. The other part of her kept hearing his voice outside the restaurant. If you want the conversation that should have happened before this dinner, come to my house tomorrow evening. I will answer what matters. He had not cornered her, had not followed her, had not turned honesty into manipulation. He had handed her a door and let her choose whether to open it. That was the problem. It made saying no feel less like self-protection and more like refusal. At work, Brooke noticed her mood before Savannah had even taken her coat off. You look like you either made a terrible decision or are about to. Savannah set her bag down and sat at her desk. That is a deeply unhelpful greeting. Macy appeared with a coffee in hand and the expression of a woman fully prepared to abandon professionalism for gossip. So, how bad is it? Savannah stared at her screen. That depends on your definition of bad. Brooke folded her arms. Did he kiss you? Savannah hesitated once, which was answer enough. Brooke dropped into the guest chair by her desk. Oh my God. Macy leaned against the divider and closed her eyes for one dramatic second. This is getting serious. Savannah looked at both of them. You do realize neither of you is making me feel better. You are not supposed to feel better, Brooke said. You are supposed to tell us everything. Savannah let out a breath and kept her voice low. He told me enough to make it clear that his life is not simple. There were men with him. Security, maybe more than security. He invited me to his house tonight so he could explain the rest. Brooke and Macy went still. Macy spoke first. His house. Yes. Brooke's brows lifted. Absolutely not. Savannah looked at her. You were the one who dared me to kiss him. I dared you to kiss him. I did not dare you to wander into a handsome crime documentary. That pulled a brief laugh out of Savannah, but it faded quickly. Brooke leaned forward. I am serious. If you go, someone knows where you are. You text us when you arrive. You text us if anything feels wrong. You leave the second your instincts say leave. Savannah nodded. I know. Macy studied her face more closely than Brooke had. Are you scared? Savannah thought about it. No, she said finally. I am aware. Brooke sighed. That is somehow worse. The day dragged after that. Savannah answered emails she barely remembered typing. She walked a venue with a client who wanted a winter gala to feel intimate and grand at the same time, which was the kind of impossible instruction Savannah usually untangled without effort. Today, it felt like someone else's voice coming out of her mouth. By 6:30, the light had already thinned into evening. She went home, changed twice, then a third time. In the end, she chose dark jeans, a fitted black sweater, and her long wool coat. Less like a woman going to seduce someone. More like a woman going to demand honesty. She told herself that mattered. Roman sent a message at 6:50. I am home. Take your time. No pressure. No car waiting outside. No suggestion that he expected her. That helped and somehow did not. She took a cab north. The ride carried her through streets slick with old snow and reflected traffic. Chicago looked beautiful in winter if you were inside something warm enough to watch it from. Storefronts glowed. Steam rose from grates. People moved quickly with their shoulders tucked against the cold. The driver pulled up in front of a renovated brownstone in the Gold Coast. Savannah looked up at the building through the window before she got out. It was elegant without shouting about it. Narrow stone steps, iron railing, tall windows with warm light behind the glass. No visible guards, no line of black cars, no theatrical display of money or power. Just a house that looked old enough to have seen decades of better and worse things than anyone admitted aloud. The front door opened before she could ring. Roman stood inside. He was not in a suit. That was the first thing that unsettled her. Dark slacks, black sweater, sleeves pushed up once at the forearms. No tie, no jacket. Less armor somehow. More dangerous for it. He looked like a man inside his own life rather than a man out in the world managing it. Savannah, hearing her name in that quiet doorway, did something unwelcome to her pulse. Roman. He stepped back at once, leaving space for her to decide whether to cross it. She did. Warmth met her immediately. A faint scent of cedar coffee and something cooking in another room. Roman took her coat but did not touch her while he did it. Thank you for coming. That depends on how this conversation goes. A shadow of amusement crossed his face. Fair. He led her inside. The house was not what she had expected. She had prepared herself for sleek coldness, for too much marble and silence, and rooms arranged more for image than comfort. Instead, the space felt controlled but lived in. Dark wood floors, cream walls, soft lamps instead of harsh overhead light. Bookshelves lined one wall of the front sitting room, filled with actual books rather than decorative color schemes. Art hung in deliberate places. Nothing cluttered, nothing careless, but not sterile either. Savannah slowed in the center of the room and looked around. This is not what I pictured. Roman hung her coat in a closet near the entry. What did you picture? She glanced at him, something colder. His mouth shifted almost imperceptibly. I spend enough time in cold places. The line landed with more weight than he seemed to intend. He gestured toward the living room. Can I get you something? Water is fine. Roman disappeared briefly into the kitchen and returned with a glass. Savannah took it and noticed how quiet the house was. Not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that came from expensive walls, thick doors, and a man who did not tolerate unnecessary noise. He did not sit too close. That mattered. Roman took the armchair opposite the couch where Savannah settled, leaving the coffee table between them like an understood boundary. For a moment he said nothing, and the silence felt less like hesitation than preparation. Then he leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on his thighs, hands loosely clasped. You asked if I was dangerous. Savannah held the glass in both hands. Yes, I told you I can be. You did. Roman's gaze stayed on her face. You also asked what kind of life I live. Savannah nodded once. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Part of my life is legitimate. Part of it is not. The room seemed to narrow around the words. Savannah set the glass down carefully before she could drop it. That is elegant language for crime. Yes? No flinch, no defense, no dilution. She looked at him for a second, then away, toward the bookshelves, the lamp, the window looking out over the dark street. Ordinary details that felt suddenly strange against the sentence he had just spoken. What does that mean exactly? Roman answered with the same calm he had used from the start, but there was more precision in it now. Less protection. More truth. My family built influence in Chicago long before I took responsibility for it. Some of our businesses are entirely legal, some are not. Some sit in between because this city has always made room for gray areas when the right people profit from them. Savannah looked back at him. You are talking like a man giving testimony. I'm trying to be accurate. She folded one leg beneath her on the couch and held his gaze. Then be more accurate. Roman was quiet for one beat. My family is organized, he said. Structured. Old enough that it survived by adapting instead of disappearing. The words were careful, but the meaning was not. Savannah's throat tightened. You are Mafia. Roman did not smile at the word, did not recoil from it either. Yes, the honesty hit harder than anything else in the room. Not because it shocked her. Some part of her had already moved in that direction the second she saw the men outside the restaurant, the black SUV, the way people recognized his name before he arrived. But hearing him confirm it without bravado, without apology, changed the shape of things completely. She stood and crossed to the window before she fully realized she had moved. Outside, a couple walked by on the opposite sidewalk, heads bent close against the cold. A cab slowed at the corner. Life remained ordinary beyond the glass. Behind her, Roman stayed where he was. That mattered too. What do you actually do for them? For the family? She turned halfway. Yes. Roman watched her, not pressing, not softening what he had said. I oversee operations, legal and otherwise, investments, logistics, enforcement when it becomes unavoidable. The last word stayed in the air. Savannah faced him fully now. Enforcement. Roman did not look away. I do not enjoy violence. That was not my question. I know. Then answer it. His expression changed only in the slightest tightening at the jaw. Yes. Violence exists in my world. I avoid it when possible. I contain it when I cannot. I do not bring it into this house. Savannah crossed her arms, less from anger than from the instinct to hold herself steady. That sounds like a line you have had to say before. I've had to understand it before. She stared at him. He was not scrambling for sympathy, not painting himself gentler than he was. If anything, the control in his voice made it harder. Easier to trust, maybe. Harder to excuse. And me, she said. Where do I fit into that world? Roman's eyes softened by the smallest degree. You do not. The answer surprised her enough that she let it show. "I do not want you in it," he continued. "I do not want anyone from it near you. I do not want your life rearranged around mine." Savannah laughed once under her breath with no real humor in it. "That may be a little late for that." A flicker of regret crossed his face. Real regret. It unsettled her more than coldness would have. "That is why I told you now." "No," she said quietly. "You told me because I asked the right question." Roman took that without argument. She walked back toward the couch, but did not sit again. "Why me?" The question came out more softly than she intended, more personally. Roman rose then, but only enough to stand a few feet away, not close enough to crowd her, close enough to keep lying impossible. "Because you do not want anything from me," he said. "Because you looked at me in that bar like I was a man standing alone, not a name. Because you kissed me without calculation. Because when I looked at you after you did not run until you decided for yourself whether you should." Savannah swallowed. That was not the kind of answer a woman forgot. He added, quieter now, "Because I noticed you. And once I did, pretending otherwise felt dishonest." The house stayed very still around them. Savannah searched his face for arrogance, for manipulation, for the polished charm of a man used to getting what he wanted. She found none of it. Only control, honesty, and something that looked almost like restraint under strain. She sat again, suddenly aware that standing made her feel too exposed. Roman remained where he was a second longer, then returned to the chair opposite her. Savannah drew in a breath. "If I ask you something, I need the truth." "You have it." "No." Her voice sharpened. "I need that to be the rule. Not the mood. Not the moment. The rule." Roman held her gaze. "Ask. If I ask you a question from now on, you answer honestly." He nodded once, agreed. "Even if the answer makes me leave." His eyes did not move, especially then. Something in her chest tightened unexpectedly. She should have felt fear then, or at least the full weight of common sense. Instead, what she felt most strongly was the impossible steadiness of him. A dangerous man, yes, but a man who had handed her truth before comfort. Savannah looked down at her hands and found them calmer than she expected. "Do many women come here?" she asked. Roman's voice stayed even. "No." "Do you mean no one or no one you care to remember? No one who matters to this conversation?" She huffed a breath that was almost a laugh. "You really refuse to make anything easy." "I am making it as clear as I can." She looked back up at him. "Are you?" "Yes." Their eyes held. Then something changed in the room, not outwardly, but in the way her body finally understood she was not here to flee a trap. She was here to decide whether the truth in front of her was something she could live with. Roman seemed to feel the shift too. His voice lost some of its formality when he asked, "Do you want to leave?" Savannah considered the question honestly. "Number?" The answer came without drama. It was simply true. Roman was still for a second, not shocked, more affected than he wanted to show. "Then stay a while," he said quietly. She did. The conversation moved after that in a stranger, more intimate rhythm. Not lighter exactly, but less armored. Savannah asked where he grew up. He told her on the near west side in a house his grandmother still insisted smelled wrong since his mother sold it. She asked whether his family knew where he was tonight. He said yes, and that was part of the problem. She asked if he had always wanted this life. That question kept him silent longest. Finally, he said, "No one born into a structure like mine thinks of wanting first. They think of obligation. And now," Roman looked at her for a long moment, "now I think about wanting more than I used to." The line settled between them with dangerous warmth. At some point, she realized she had finished the water and was no longer sitting at the edge of the couch. Roman had relaxed back into the chair, but not fully. He seemed like a man who only knew one setting for alertness, even when he looked calm. The kitchen light glowed softly from the next room. "You were cooking," she said. Roman glanced toward it. "I was. You expected me to stay. I hoped you might." Savannah raised a brow. "That is a distinction. It matters." She surprised herself by smiling. "What were you making?" "Nothing ambitious." "That sounds suspicious." Roman stood. "Come see." She followed him into the kitchen. It was as restrained as the rest of the house, but warmer. Dark cabinets, pale stone counters, copper pans hanging over the stove, a pot simmering gently filling the room with the scent of garlic, tomato, and basil, bread wrapped in a cloth on the counter, a bottle of olive oil, 2 plates waiting near the island. Savannah stopped and looked around. "You actually cook?" Roman moved to lower the heat beneath the pot. I told you I did. I assumed you meant technically. He glanced at her. I rarely speak technically. That earned a real laugh. He handed her a spoon. Taste. Savannah hesitated, then dipped the spoon into the sauce and tried it. Rich, slow cooked. Better than she expected, which annoyed her. Well, she said that is inconvenient. Roman's gaze sharpened with quiet amusement. Why? Because I was prepared for organized crime. I was not prepared for competence in the kitchen. His mouth moved almost a smile. Life is full of disappointments. They ate at the kitchen island, and the intimacy of that surprised her more than the dinner had. No white linen, no candlelit distance, just pasta in warm bowls, a loaf of bread torn apart by hand, the sound of cutlery against ceramic, and Roman across from her in a kitchen lit softly enough to make the whole city outside feel distant. Somewhere between the second bite and the end of the meal, the worst of the tension loosened. Not disappeared, never that, but softened into something they could carry without dropping. When Savannah stood to bring her plate to the sink, Roman reached past her for the glass she had left on the counter. The movement brought him close enough that she felt his heat along her arm. Neither of them moved away immediately. Savannah turned her head. Roman was already looking at her. Up close, without the protection of a restaurant table or a formal conversation, the pull between them felt almost unfair. His features were too controlled to be called soft, but there was nothing cold in his face now. Only watchfulness. Permission. Restraint held so tightly it had become its own kind of tension. Why do I feel calmer here than I should? She asked quietly. Roman's eyes searched hers. Because I am not lying to you. Her pulse beat once hard. That should not be enough. No, he said. But it matters. Savannah's hand rested on the counter beside his. Close. Not touching. Are you always this careful? With people I do not want to break. The words went through her like heat through glass. Before she could answer, his phone buzzed somewhere in the living room. The sound changed him at once. Not completely, but enough that she noticed. Roman looked toward the doorway. His jaw tightened. Do you need to get that? Yes. He did not move. Savannah studied him. And you are not going to. Number. Because of me. Roman brought his gaze back to hers. Because I want this evening to belong to itself. That line sat low and warm in her chest long after he said it. They moved back to the living room after dinner. Roman made coffee for himself and tea for her without asking whether she took sugar. He guessed correctly when he handed it over. She sat at one end of the couch this time. He sat at the other, closer than before. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence rather than merely observe it. The conversation drifted into smaller things. Her first job in high school. The piano lessons he hated until he turned 15 and realized discipline in one area sharpened discipline in others. The fact that Brooke would survive an apocalypse through sheer criticism alone. The fact that Roman disliked lilies because his grandmother filled every funeral with them. That last detail stilled the room again for a second. Savannah turned toward him. You have been to a lot of funerals. Roman looked into his coffee. Yes. She waited, then asked, people in your world. Yes, and you still want to stay in it. Roman was quiet long enough that the answer changed shape before it arrived. I want less of it than I used to. The honesty of that drew her closer before she meant to move. Her shoulder brushed the back cushion. Roman turned his head toward her. Because of me, she said softly. His gaze held hers. Because of what I am when I am with you. The room seemed to breathe around them. Savannah did not trust herself to answer immediately. Her throat had tightened in a way that felt too close to tenderness. When she finally spoke, it came out almost as a whisper. That is a lot. I know. You barely know me. Roman's expression did not change, but his voice lowered. I know enough. The city lights outside the window cast faint reflections across the room. Her teacup sat cooling in her hand. Roman's coffee had long gone untouched. Savannah put the cup down on the table. What happens when people in your world become attached to something outside it? Roman's gaze sharpened. They become vulnerable. And you. He looked at her for one beat too long. I do not make a habit of attachment. Until now. Yes. The word was quiet, absolute. Savannah drew in a breath she did not fully feel into her lungs. She did the only thing that seemed honest then. She shifted a little closer and rested her hand lightly on his forearm. Roman went still, not rigid, not startled. Just still in the way a man becomes still when something matters enough that he refuses to mishandle it. You make that sound like a confession, she said. It is. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips. Solid. Controlled. But beneath the control, she could feel life there. Tension. Pulse. Something held very carefully in place. Savannah's voice softened. I do not want to be a weakness. Roman turned his arm enough that his hand covered hers. Not trapping. Holding. You are not, he said. What am I then? His eyes lifted to hers, dark and steady, a reason. The words settled in the center of her chest and stayed there. She did not know whether it was the honesty, the quiet, or the fact that she believed him, but the distance between them suddenly felt unnecessary. Savannah leaned in first. The kiss was slower than the one outside the restaurant. Less surprise. More knowledge. Roman touched her as if every inch of contact had first passed through restraint. One hand at her jaw, the other still wrapped around her hand on his arm. Warmth, pressure, deliberate care, no rush to prove anything, no hunger that overwhelmed. Just the startling intimacy of being kissed by a man who chose every movement. When they parted, Roman stayed close enough that she could feel his breath against her cheek. This does not feel dangerous, she whispered. His thumb brushed once beneath her ear. That is what concerns me. She smiled faintly despite the tightness in her chest. You are allowed to want something good. Roman did not answer right away. For a moment, he only looked at her as if he were trying to memorize the exact expression on her face. Then his phone buzzed again. This time he did not pretend not to hear it. The softness in him tightened. His hand slipped from her jaw, though not abruptly. Is that important? Savannah asked. Yes. Does it change anything? Roman glanced towards the dark screen on the table, then back at her. Not tonight. The answer was too precise to be casual. Savannah felt it at once, and tomorrow. Roman's gaze turned serious in a different way. Not romantic now. Not intimate. Strategic. Tomorrow, he said, someone may notice I am distracted. By me. Yes. The room went very quiet. Savannah held his eyes. And that matters. Roman's hand lifted once more, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that felt almost at odds with everything else she knew about him. More than you understand, he said. She did not move away. Neither did he. Outside, the city kept going in its old, familiar rhythm. Traffic, light, winter. Somewhere below, a horn sounded and was swallowed by distance. But inside that room, with Roman's hand near her face and his eyes fixed on hers, Savannah could feel the truth of it settling between them with impossible clarity. Whatever this was, it had already become real enough to be noticed. That truth stayed with Savannah all the way home. Not just the words themselves, but the way Roman had said them. Calm, exact, without trying to soften what he was or sharpen what he felt. By the time she unlocked her apartment door in Lakeview, kicked off her boots, and set her bag down by the kitchen counter, the city outside felt farther away than it should have. Her rooms were the same. The throw blanket still half folded on the couch, the stack of mail still waiting on the entry table, the small lamp near the window still casting that warm amber light she usually found comforting. Tonight it all felt slightly altered, as if some invisible line had been crossed, and the shape of her life had shifted by a fraction she could already feel. She locked the door, then checked it again, not because she was afraid, because Roman had made her aware. She stood there for the moment with one hand on the brass knob, listening to the quiet hum of the building. A television somewhere down the hall. Footsteps overhead. Pipes ticking softly in the walls. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. Her phone buzzed. Roman. Home. Savannah looked at the screen for a second before answering. Yes. The reply came almost immediately. Good. That was all. No long message, no demand for reassurance, no ornamental language pretending to be intimacy. Just one word that somehow felt more possessive than it had any right to. Savannah set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stared at it a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned off the lights, went to bed, and lay awake longer than she meant to, hearing his voice each time she closed her eyes. You are not a weakness, a reason. The next morning she woke with that same strange sense of displacement. Not unhappiness, not panic. Something quieter and more difficult to dismiss. The certainty that what had begun with one reckless dare was now fully occupying space in her real life. At work, Brooke noticed it first. Savannah had barely sat down before Brooke appeared at her desk with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and accusation in her eyes. You look calm, Brooke said. Savannah opened her laptop. "Thank you." That was not a compliment. Macy arrived 2 seconds later and leaned against the divider. It is the dangerous kind of calm, too, the kind women get right before they make decisions with permanent consequences. Savannah accepted the coffee and gave Brooke a look. "Have either of you considered being normal?" "Not once," Macy said. Brooke pulled the guest chair closer and sat. "So, tell us." Savannah looked between them. There was no point pretending nothing had changed. They would see through it in under a minute. "He told me the truth," she said. Macy straightened. "All of it." "No, enough of it." Brooke folded her arms, meaning. Savannah lowered her voice, though no one was close enough to hear. "He confirmed what we already suspected. His family is connected, organized, powerful. He runs things, not all of them legal." Neither of them spoke for a beat. Then Brooke exhaled slowly. "You are dating the kind of man mothers warn their daughters about in prayers." "I am not dating him." Macy lifted a brow. That denial felt weak. Savannah ignored her. He did not hide it. He did not sugarcoat it. He answered what I asked. Brooke studied her face carefully. "And how did that make you feel?" Savannah looked down at the lid of her coffee. The answer should have been simpler than it was. Alarmed, sensible, ready to leave. Instead, the first word that came to mind was seen. She hated that. "It made me feel like he respects me enough not to lie," she said finally. Macy nodded slowly. "That is how this gets people." Brooke leaned in. "Savannah, I know. No, I need you to actually hear me. Men like that can be careful and still be dangerous. Honest and still ruin your life." Savannah met her eyes. "I know." The words were quiet but true. She did know. She also knew something else. Something harder to explain in an office that smelled like coffee and printer paper and floral samples. Roman never pushed. That was the part she could not stop thinking about. He never cornered, never presumed, never treated her curiosity like consent. Every step forward had been met with space enough for her to refuse him, and in a situation that should have made her feel trapped, that mattered more than she wanted it to. The day moved slowly after that. She worked on autopilot, replied to vendors, reviewed seating charts, walked a bride through linen options with professional patience while some other part of her mind kept circling the same impossible fact. Roman had said someone might notice he was distracted. By evening, she understood she had been waiting for him to explain that line without admitting she was waiting at all. The message came just before 6. "Can I see you tonight?" Savannah stared at the screen. Then another line appeared. "Your place, if you prefer." That changed the shape of it instantly. Not his house. Not his terms. Her apartment. Her space. She typed before she could overthink it. "Come to me." His reply arrived almost at once. "I will be there at 7. Savannah stood in her kitchen with the phone still in her hand and became abruptly aware of everything in the room. The dishes drying beside the sink, the stack of cookbooks on the counter, the candle on the shelf she only lit when friends came over. The fact that her apartment was small and warm and unmistakably hers. She wanted him here. That truth landed harder than any message. By 6:40, she had changed into cream knit pants and a dark-fitted sweater, cleaned the kitchen for no reason, then immediately regretted cleaning because it made the whole thing feel too deliberate. At 6:55, she lit the least embarrassing candle she owned, and then nearly blew it out because it smelled aggressively hopeful. At 7 sharp, there was a knock. Not loud, not tentative, certain. Savannah crossed the apartment and opened the door. Roman stood in the hallway looking like he did not belong to its bad lighting or narrow proportions. Dark coat, black sweater beneath it, gloves in one hand. His gaze found hers immediately and stayed there. Savannah. Something in her chest tightened. Roman. He did not step in until she moved aside. That mattered too. Inside, he took in the apartment with one slow look that felt observant rather than judgmental. The framed photos near the entry. The bookshelf crowded with novels and event design binders. The throw blanket on the couch. The small dining table pushed near the window because there was nowhere else for it to go. "It is not much," she said, and regretted the sentence the second it left her mouth. Roman looked at her. "It is yours." The same thing he had said before, and somehow it landed even deeper here. Savannah took his coat and hung it by the door. "Tea or water?" "Tea is fine." She moved into the kitchen. Roman followed, but not too close. He stood near the counter, hands loose at his sides, watching her fill the kettle. The domesticity of it felt almost surreal. Savannah glanced over her shoulder. "You look like a man trying very hard not to loom." Roman's mouth shifted. Is it working? Barely. That earned the faintest trace of amusement. She set 2 mugs on the counter. You said last night someone might notice you were distracted. Roman's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Less warmth, more purpose. Yes. Savannah turned off the faucet. Was that why you wanted to come here? Yes. She faced him fully. Then talk. Roman held her gaze for a moment before answering. There is a meeting tomorrow. With who? My family. The kettle clicked on. A low hum filled the kitchen. Savannah leaned one hip against the counter. And why does that matter to me? Roman's eyes did not leave hers. Because I am changing the structure of what I oversee. Because that will be noticed. Because they will ask why. A faint chill moved over her skin. Savannah kept her voice steady. And the answer is me. Yes. The directness of that did strange things to the air between them. She looked down at the mugs, then back up. That is a lot to put on someone. It is, Roman said quietly. That is why I am here. The kettle began to steam softly. Savannah did not move to pour yet. You are changing things because of me. Roman did not soften it. Because of what I want when I am with you. Because I do not want the rest of my life shaped entirely by force pressure and inherited obligation. Because when I leave here or leave your side, I find myself measuring everything against peace. The honesty of it took the room by the throat. Savannah had expected intensity. She had not expected clarity. That is not a small thing to say, I know, and it is not romantic if it gets me hurt. A shadow crossed his face, real, unhidden. It will not. She let out a short breath. You cannot promise that? Roman stepped closer, then just enough to narrow the space without crowding her. I can promise that I will not build a future that places you unprotected inside my world. The kettle whistled softly. Savannah reached past him to turn it off and was suddenly aware of how near he was. His heat. The clean scent of cedar and cold air still clinging to his sweater. The force it seemed to take him to stand that close and remain utterly still. She poured the water into the mugs because she needed something to do with her hands. And tomorrow, she said, setting the kettle down, what exactly happens? Roman watched the tea darken in the cups. I tell them I am stepping back from daily control of certain operations, illegal operations. Yes. You think they will just allow that? Number. Savannah handed him a mug. Their fingers touched for half a second, enough to send a small, hard pulse through her wrist. Then what? Roman took the tea, but his gaze remained on her. Then I make it clear that this is not a negotiation. She studied him. There it was again. The thing that made everything about him both worse and more compelling. He never raised his voice, never reached for drama. He said things quietly, and the room rearranged itself around them. Savannah carried her mug to the couch. Roman followed and sat beside her this time, not opposite. Close enough that the cushion dipped under his weight. Close enough that his presence changed the room simply by being in it. She turned toward him. What happens if someone in that room decides I am a liability? Roman's gaze sharpened immediately. Then they will learn otherwise. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. Savannah set the mug down on the coffee table. Roman. He looked at her. I need you to understand something before you walk into that meeting. I am not a symbol. I am not a convenient reason to become a better man. I am a person with a life that exists outside your family, outside your name, outside whatever world shaped you. Roman's expression did not harden. If anything, it steadied further. I know. Do you? Yes. His voice dropped slightly. That is exactly why I am not bringing you into that room. Exactly why I have not asked you to stand beside me there and validate anything. I am not asking you to carry the weight of my decision. I am telling you the truth about it before I make it. Savannah held his eyes. That answer reached her in a place caution could not. She looked away first toward the dark window where the city reflected back in fragments. You make it very difficult to be angry with you. Roman's mouth moved faintly. That is not deliberate. It feels deliberate. He took a sip of tea. I'm trying to be clear, not persuasive. Savannah laughed softly under her breath. Those things are not as different as you think. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the reality settling between them. A family meeting. A man powerful enough to alter criminal operations. A woman sitting on a second-hand couch in Lakeview holding a warm mug and trying to decide when her life had stopped feeling simple. After a moment she asked, do they know my name? Roman's answer came immediately. Not yet. The room seemed to narrow. Yet. If I need to say it tomorrow, I will not do so lightly. Savannah's pulse climbed. And if you do say it, Roman set his mug down. Then it becomes real to them. The words landed with terrifying precision. She looked at him. You are asking my permission. Yes. That more than anything else that night undid her a little. Powerful men were not usually trained to ask. Roman did it as if it were the only honorable option available to him. Savannah folded her hands in her lap to keep them steady. If you say my name, what are you really telling them? Roman's eyes held hers. That my life is moving in a direction they do not control. That there is someone outside the structure they cannot treat as leverage. That the old version of me is no longer the only one they have access to. The honesty of that made her chest tighten. She took a slow breath. I am not moving in tomorrow. Roman nodded immediately. I would not ask that. But I am also not pretending this means nothing. A flicker of relief crossed his face so quickly she nearly missed it. I want to keep seeing you, she said. I want to keep choosing this, step by step, nothing faster than I can actually live with. Roman closed his eyes for the briefest moment like a man absorbing impact without wanting anyone to notice. When he opened them, his voice was quiet, step by step. Savannah leaned back against the couch and let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Some invisible tension in the room loosened at once. Roman turned toward her more fully. There is one more thing. Her pulse jumped again. You have to stop saying that. A faint warmth touched his eyes. I will consider it. She folded one leg beneath her. Fine. What? If they push back hard enough, I may need to make a public distinction between what remains mine and what does not. Savannah frowned, meaning. Roman's gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. Meaning I may need to state clearly that you are outside all family business. Outside any right of approach, scrutiny, or pressure. The words should have frightened her. Instead, they made her feel something stranger. Not safe exactly. Protected. And that was its own kind of danger because she was starting to understand how easy it would be to lean on the kind of certainty he offered. Savannah asked softly. And if they do not like that? Roman's expression went still. They do not have to like it. The conviction in his voice settled deep. She reached for his hand before she fully decided to do it. His fingers closed around hers at once, firm and warm, without tightening past what she allowed. This is insane, she murmured. Yes, and I am still here. Yes. He drew her hand to his mouth and pressed a slow kiss to her knuckles. The intimacy of it went through her like a shiver. Savannah moved closer before she could stop herself. Roman met her halfway, his free hand coming to rest lightly at her waist. The kiss this time was different from the ones before, less cautious, not because he was taking more, because both of them were. Days of restraint and precise honesty had built something with weight to it, and now it pressed between them, warm and undeniable. When they parted, Roman rested his forehead lightly against hers. Tell me you are still sure, he said, voice low. Savannah swallowed. I am sure enough to stay. His thumb moved once at her waist. That is enough. They stayed like that for a while, not speaking. The candle burned lower near the bookshelf. A car horn sounded distantly on the street below. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. Ordinary life surrounding something that no longer felt ordinary at all. Later, Roman stood to leave. At the door, Savannah held his coat while he slid it on. The hallway light from the open door cast a narrow strip of gold across the floorboards. He looked at her with that same measured intensity that had followed her from the bar into everything after. I will message you after the meeting. She nodded. Do that. Roman's hand lifted to her jaw, fingertips brushing lightly along her cheek. Lock the door. Her lips parted. Why? His gaze shifted once toward the hall alert in a way she was beginning to recognize, then back to her. Because I do not leave important things to chance. The line should have unsettled her more than it did. Savannah held his eyes. Good night, Roman. His expression softened by a fraction. Good night, Savannah. He left. She locked the door behind him and stood there for a long moment with her hand still resting against the wood. The apartment felt too quiet after his absence. Too still. The imprint of him remained everywhere. The tea mugs on the coffee table. The faint scent of cedar near the door. The warmth in the room where his body had been. She slept lightly. The next morning his message arrived just after 8. Going in now. Savannah stared at the words while morning light spread pale and cold across her bedroom wall. She typed back, be careful. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Always. That one word stayed with her through the morning. At work, she was useless. Brooke noticed first, Macy second. By 10:30, they had each brought her coffee she did not ask for, and a level of emotional surveillance she normally would have resented. At 11:12, her phone buzzed. Her heart jumped so hard it almost hurt. Roman, it is done. Savannah exhaled and stood up before she realized she was moving. I need 5 minutes. Brooke and Macy both looked up as she stepped into the empty break room and closed the door behind her. Her fingers moved over the screen. How bad? A pause. Resistance. Questions. Warnings. Then another message. No negotiation. Savannah stared at that line. Then one more appeared. I said your name. Her stomach dropped and tightened at the same time. Before she could answer, another message followed. I also made one thing very clear. She waited. No one approaches you. No one questions you. No one uses you to reach me. Savannah leaned back against the counter and closed her eyes. The room around her smelled like burnt coffee and microwave popcorn. But the words in her phone carried the cold weight of old room's family pressure and the quiet authority of a man who had just redrawn the edges of his own life. She typed slowly, and they accepted that. The pause this time lasted longer. They understood it. Savannah knew enough now to hear the distinction. Not acceptance, recognition. She looked down at the screen pulse still high. Then one final message came through. May I see you tonight? She answered without thinking too long. Yes. That evening he did not arrive in the black SUV. He drove a dark sedan and parked at the curb like any other man coming to see a woman after work. When Savannah opened the door, she understood at once that something had shifted. Roman looked the same. He also looked lighter, still composed, still deliberate, still unmistakably himself. But some invisible pressure had eased from the set of his shoulders. She stepped aside and let him in. The apartment seemed even smaller than usual with him inside it, but not in a way she disliked. Roman looked at her for a long second before speaking. It is done, he said again, quieter now. Savannah searched his face. Tell me. He took off his coat and set it over the back of a chair rather than handing it to her. A small thing. An unguarded thing. She noticed. I made the changes official, he said. I stepped back from direct control of the operations I told you about. Legal businesses remain under my oversight. The rest will move through other hands. Savannah folded her arms more to contain the emotion rising in her, than from defensiveness. And your family. Roman's jaw shifted once, unhappy. That feels understated. It is. She moved closer. And my name? Roman looked at her with steady seriousness. I told them you are not to be approached, not to be discussed outside my presence, not to be evaluated, watched, or drawn into anything that belongs to them. Savannah's throat tightened. You did that publicly. Yes. Something warm and unsteady moved through her chest. Not because he had claimed her, because he had drawn a line around her without dragging her across it. She stepped into his space before caution could intervene and put her hand flat against his chest. Roman went still at once. You protected me, she said softly. His hand covered hers, yes. The answer was simple, certain. Savannah looked up at him. That must have caused a reaction. It did, and Roman's eyes darkened slightly, but not with anger. With memory. It will be managed. She almost laughed at the understatement of that too, but emotion caught too close in her throat. Instead she whispered, you really did it. Roman's gaze moved over her face as if confirming she was here, real still his point of gravity after a room full of pressure. Yes, he said, I did. For a long moment neither of them moved. Savannah kept her hand against Roman's chest and felt the steady beat beneath her palm. Strong, controlled, real. The apartment around them seemed to fall away until there was only the warmth of his body, the quiet in the room, and the fact that he had walked into a room built by duty and blood and expectation, then said her name out loud anyway. Roman's hand stayed over hers. I never asked you to do all of that, she said softly. I know. You changed your life. His gaze did not leave hers. I changed its direction. The answer settled deep. Savannah searched his face for strain, for regret, for the first crack of a man who had just made a decision too large to carry gracefully. She found none. He looked tired, yes. Not physically. Somewhere deeper than that. The kind of fatigue that came after holding your ground in a room full of people who expected you to kneel. You look different, she murmured. Roman's mouth curved faintly. You said that before. I mean it more now. He let out a quiet breath that might have been the beginning of a laugh. Then perhaps I am. She stepped closer until hardly any space remained between them. Are you all right? Roman looked at her as if the question itself reached somewhere private. I am here. That was not exactly an answer. It was enough. Savannah slid her hand from his chest to the back of his neck and kissed him before she could think too hard about it. Roman met her at once, one arm circling her waist, the other settling at her jaw with that same deliberate care that had become more intimate to her than urgency ever could. This kiss felt different from the others, not because it was hungrier, because it carried relief, weight released, something chosen and survived. When they parted, Roman rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes for the briefest moment. Stay, she whispered. He opened his eyes again, tonight. Yes, the answer came quickly, too naturally to pretend otherwise. Roman's hand moved along her side, slow and steady. All right. That was how it began. Not with a dramatic declaration, not with the world stopping, with a man setting his coat over the back of her dining chair and leaving it there while Savannah reheated leftover pasta in a kitchen barely big enough for two people who were trying very hard not to make every small movement intimate. He stood beside her while she stirred sauce in a saucepan and looked absurdly out of place and entirely at home at the same time. You have been in better kitchens than this, she said. Roman leaned one shoulder against the counter. Yes, and his gaze moved over the room, over the chipped ceramic spoon rest near the stove, the stack of unopened mail by the fruit bowl, the candle burned halfway down on the shelf, then back to her, and none of them mattered more. The line should have embarrassed her. Instead, it softened something she had not realized was still braced inside her. They ate on the couch because her table was too small and because neither of them seemed interested in pretending the evening was formal. Roman loosened his sweater cuffs and listened while Savannah told him about Brooke nearly losing her mind over a groom who wanted custom-engraved ice cubes. He listened as if the story belonged beside boardrooms and threats and family meetings, as if the texture of her ordinary life mattered as much as anything else in his. At one point, Savannah caught herself studying him when he was not looking. The angle of his jaw in the lamplight. The way one hand rested on his knee, even at ease, never fully without structure. The slight shift in his expression each time she laughed. You are staring, he said. She did not deny it. You look calmer here. Roman turned his head toward her. I am. In my apartment. Yes. Savannah smiled faintly. That should flatter me more than it does. It should concern you. Everything with you comes with that warning label. His eyes warmed. Not everything. The evening settled after that. Not into silence, but into the kind of ease that only came when two people stopped performing around each other. Roman rinsed the plates without being asked. Savannah leaned in the kitchen doorway and watched him roll up his sleeves another inch to keep them dry-looking, altogether too competent for a man who had spent his day telling powerful people no. You do realize this is doing something for your reputation, she said. Roman glanced at her over his shoulder. Washing dishes? Yes. What exactly? It suggests hidden depths. I suspect you already knew those existed. Savannah laughed softly. You are impossible. Yes, he said it so calmly that she had to laugh again. Later, when the city outside thinned into the softer sounds of late traffic and distant sirens, they moved to bed with none of the rush she might once have expected from a man like Roman. Even there he was careful, not because he lacked desire. She felt the force of that every time his hand slid across her waist or his mouth found the hollow beneath her ear. He was careful because everything with him seemed to come through intention first. He touched her as if trust mattered as much as hunger, and maybe more. Savannah understood then that what drew her to him most powerfully was not the danger. It was the discipline he placed around it. She woke before him the next morning, which surprised her. Gray winter light spilled through the blinds in narrow strips. Roman lay on his back beside her, one arm loose across the sheet, his face unguarded in sleep in a way she had not yet seen. Without the precision in his eyes and the control in his posture, he looked younger. Not soft, just less armored. The stern line of his mouth was easier now. The tension usually held in his jaw gone. Savannah stayed very still and looked at him longer than she intended. The apartment felt different with him in it. Full. Anchored. As if some invisible hum of alertness had been replaced by something quieter and steadier. Roman opened his eyes without moving. Good morning, he said, voice rough with sleep. Savannah smiled before she could stop herself. Do you always wake up like that? With eyes, with suspicion. His mouth shifted slightly, usually. She rolled onto one elbow. You were sleeping. So were you. That is not the same thing. Roman turned his head toward her on the pillow. You were watching me. I was evaluating the threat level, and she let her gaze move over him once openly now. Low, surprisingly. That seems optimistic. Maybe. He reached for her, then hand settling at her waist and drawing her over him with effortless certainty. The kiss he gave her was slow and warm and entirely too intimate for an hour when she had not yet had coffee. When he let her go, she stayed there for a second, forehead against his shoulder, listening to the quiet beat of his heart. This is how the weeks began to gather. Not dramatically, not like a whirlwind. More like weather changing slowly enough that one day you looked up and realized the air had become different. Roman did not vanish back into his world after that meeting. He came back, repeatedly, consistently, quietly. He texted in the morning, sometimes only a few words. Did you sleep? Eat lunch. How bad is today? At night, he asked what made her laugh, what venue had annoyed her most, whether Brooke had threatened any floral designers. He remembered details most people forgot by accident. Which tea she bought when she was tired. Which coat she wore when she expected rain. Which side of the bed she gravitated toward without seeming to notice she did it. Brooke noticed first, of course. Savannah was standing in the office kitchen stirring powdered creamer into coffee. She did not even want when Brooke leaned against the counter and watched her with open scrutiny. You are smiling at nothing. Savannah did not look up. That is a normal human activity. For women in love, maybe. Savannah nearly dropped the spoon. I am not. Brooke lifted one brow. Interesting that you did not ask which part of that sentence I meant. Macy walked in just in time to hear it and made a sound of delight. Oh, this is getting good. Savannah set the mug down. You both need occupations. We have them, Macy said. Yours is just more entertaining. Brooke's expression softened a little beneath the mischief. Is he good to you? The question settled differently than the teasing had. Savannah answered without needing to think, yes. Consistently. Yes. Without making you feel like you have to earn it. Savannah looked at her friend then. Yes. Brooke nodded slowly. All right. Macy crossed her arms. That is all. For now, Brooke said. Savannah laughed, but she felt the warmth of the exchange long after it passed. Her friend saw what she had been reluctant to say aloud. Roman did not love in spectacle. He loved in attention, in presence, in the absence of pressure, in the way he made space for her life rather than asking her to disappear into his. The first time he cooked dinner in her apartment, the kitchen seemed to shrink around him. He stood at the counter chopping vegetables with absurd focus while Savannah watched from the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, amused despite herself. You do realize this is my kitchen. Roman glanced at the knife in his hand. I am aware. You are acting like it belongs to a serious person. He looked up then. It belongs to you. She rolled her eyes. That answer is annoyingly effective. Roman went back to slicing peppers. You continue to be vulnerable to simple truth. Savannah came closer and leaned beside him. That is not simple truth. That is your very specific talent for saying things in a way that makes resistance inconvenient. His mouth curved. There it is again. What? That accusation that I am persuasive on purpose. You are? Roman set the knife down and turned toward her. No. Number? I am careful on purpose. The rest is yours. The line silenced her in the most unfair way. That night after dinner, after dishes, after Roman had stood at her sink, looking very much like a man who should never have known the ordinary intimacy of drying plates in a too-small kitchen, they ended up on the couch beneath the old throw blanket she usually used alone. Savannah rested her head against his shoulder and traced idle circles on his forearm. Can I ask you something? Yes. Are things quieter now? Roman took a moment before answering. Different, not quieter. She tilted her head. That sounds ominous. It is accurate. His honesty had never become easier. She had simply become more willing to stand in front of it. And you are all right with that. Roman looked down at her. I am more all right than I was before. Savannah's chest tightened at the quiet certainty in his voice. He added, I do not mistake peace for weakness anymore. The sentence landed deeper than he knew. She shifted and kissed him slow and lingering, because some emotions were too full for words, and because she was starting to understand that Roman responded best to what was given freely. Winter leaned toward spring almost without either of them noticing. The city softened at the edges. Snow gave way to cold rain. The branches outside Savannah's window began hinting at green. Roman's dark coat started appearing regularly on the chair by the door. A spare toothbrush appeared in her bathroom. Then a second razor. Then 2 of his shirts hanging beside hers because she said they may as well stop pretending. One evening they were making dinner together in the tiny kitchen elbows, bumping music low from her phone on the counter. Roman had insisted on bringing better coffee weeks ago. Now his French press sat beside her chipped ceramic mugs as if it had always belonged there. Savannah watched him reach for olive oil on the top shelf without looking and smiled to herself. Roman noticed, he always did. What? She turned the burner down under the sauce. Nothing. His eyes narrowed slightly. That is not true. Savannah set the spoon down and leaned against the counter. You are here more than you are at your own house. Roman followed her gaze around the apartment. The coat on the chair, the mug he always used drying beside the sink, the book he had left face down on her coffee table. Yes, he said. And. She folded her arms, suddenly aware that her pulse had quickened. Do you want to continue pretending that is accidental? Roman went completely still. Savannah held his gaze and felt a ridiculous burst of nerves. This man had walked into a family meeting and redrawn his life, and somehow asking him this felt more exposing than all of that. You can move in, she said quietly, if you want. Roman did not answer immediately. For the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely caught off guard. Not uncertain. Affected. Savannah. She smiled a little, softening what suddenly felt like a cliff edge. That was not a proposal. Relax. His mouth moved, but emotion touched his eyes too deeply for amusement to fully take hold. You are sure? I would not say it if I were not. Roman set down the dish towel in his hand with exaggerated care, as though everything in the room had become fragile. Then he stepped toward her. I will not place anything in your space that you do not want there, he said. Savannah's heart squeezed painfully. I know. His hand came up to rest against her cheek. Then, yes. The answer was quiet. It carried more weight than louder things ever could. Moving him in happened in stages, because that suited both of them. Garment bags first, then books. Then the coffee grinder he claimed was essential and she claimed was ridiculous until she tasted the difference. He brought order without erasing her. A watch box tucked discreetly into a drawer, shoes lined neatly by the entry. A dark wool coat hanging beside her lighter ones, making the whole apartment look unexpectedly balanced. Brooke came over the first evening after his things began to appear in earnest and stood in the middle of the living room with her hands on her hips. Well, she said. Savannah looked up from unpacking a box of Roman's books onto the shelf. That is not a sentence. It is all I have at the moment. Macy, who had followed Brooke inside carrying wine, looked around more openly. He really did move into the tiny apartment. Roman emerged from the kitchen with 3 glasses and the composure of a man who could walk into almost any room unshaken. Good evening. Macy accepted a glass from him and narrowed her eyes. You still make me nervous. Roman inclined his head. Understood. Brooke watched the exchange, then looked at Savannah. He is annoyingly difficult to hate. Savannah smiled. I know. Roman looked at her then, and the warmth in his face was enough to make her look away first. Life settled after that, not into perfection, into rhythm. He learned how to stand in her world without taking it over. She learned the shape of his quiet moods, the way he needed silence after certain calls, the way his shoulders eased when she touched the back of his neck after a long day. They argued once over closet space and once over whether his coffee routine required military precision. They made up in the kitchen both times. Months later, on a rain-washed evening when the city beyond their windows gleamed in long blurred strips of gold and red, Savannah sat curled on the couch with a book she had not turned a page of in 10 minutes. Roman was in the other room finishing a call, his low voice carrying just enough through the half-open door to let her know he was there. The apartment felt fuller now, more finished. His watch on the side table, her scarf draped over the chair. 2 lives no longer touching at the edges but built into the same daily architecture. When Roman came back into the room, something in his face made her set the book down at once. He looked calm, too calm. Savannah's pulse kicked once. In his hand was a small velvet box. He did not kneel. That would have been wrong for him, somehow too theatrical for a man who had spent their entire story choosing sincerity over performance. Instead, he sat beside her close enough that their knees touched and took her hand in both of his. Savannah Blake, he said. Her breath caught at the sound of her full name in his voice. You changed the direction of my life without once asking me to become someone false. You gave me peace without turning it into a test. You looked at me clearly and stayed anyway. Her eyes burned before he had even opened the box. Roman's thumb moved once over her knuckles. I do not want a future that happens around you. I want one built with you. He opened the box. The ring caught the lamplight in one clean flash. Will you keep choosing me? He asked quietly for the rest of it. Savannah laughed, then soft and broken by tears she had not intended to let fall. Of course, this was how he would ask. Not with spectacle, with clarity, with the same steady honesty that had drawn her to him from the beginning. Yes, she whispered. Roman's eyes searched hers one final second as if making certain. Savannah laughed again through tears. Yes. The tension in his face eased in a way that made him look for a brief, unguarded moment, almost overwhelmed. He slid the ring onto her finger. Then he pulled her into him and held her there with one hand at the back of her neck and the other wrapped tightly around her waist as if the world had finally aligned into something he trusted enough to stop bracing against. Later, long after the rain had softened and the city lights had settled into their usual pulse beyond the windows, Savannah stood with her back against his chest and looked out over the street below. Roman's arms were around her. His chin rested lightly against her hair. Do you ever think about that night at the bar? She asked. His hold tightened just slightly every day. Savannah smiled and looked down at the ring on her hand, then at the reflections of city light in the glass. One reckless dare. Roman kissed her temple, then her hair. The best thing that ever happened to me. Savannah leaned back into him fully and closed her eyes. For the first time since the story began, nothing in the moment felt divided. Not his world and hers. Not danger and peace. Not the man people feared, and the man who now stood in a quiet apartment holding the woman who had changed everything simply by refusing to see him as untouchable. Love had not dragged Roman toward darkness. It had given him somewhere truer to go.